No, the vendors are funny. It's just the language itself is not, The Madek one already sounds like a threat. You can't. Thank you so much for having me. I don't do stand-up. I saw the program a couple of days ago and they were like, oh, you are going to be part of the comedy section. On back, joke, because this is not really what I do on a regular basis, right? I am a lawyer by trade, a researcher on the side, a thrifter for the fun of it. The suit is thrifted. And I preach sometimes. And apparently I make more jokes than I do punchlines in the sermon. So I guess that's why they invited me and they thought that this would be a good idea. I was sitting and I was watching and I was like, I wonder what this is going to look like when we get here, right? Like how the restaurant is going to look like. I haven't been to Eastgate since I was in matric, which was somewhere around the year Nelson Mandela was released. So a very long time ago. So I didn't realize that there was like a courtyard that had all the restaurants and all that type of stuff. So you walk in, and I'm listening to all the bangers playing outside, Amapiano and all that. I'm like, I wonder how this gospel thing is going to play out. And I walk in and I see the lady singing and she did such an amazing job. And I wonder, I'm like, yo, Paul's letter to the Dasmites would have been so lit. He would have been like, oh, so send a podcast, a restaurant to go. You say Eastgate, Pamwaband. And I thought that would have been so fascinating. I think the first and the biggest joke that a lot of people are going to find really, really hilarious, and that people that are watching this that I think are going to find really hilarious, is that I consider myself both a feminist and a Christian. But I figure if I'm black and Christian, I've already managed to beat kind of the biggest struggle there is in being a Christian. If you're opening the Bible and you read Exodus, and you see these people who land up in Egypt and who find themselves in slavery in an ancient land, and they reach out to God and they say, can you please save us? And then God intervenes and he saves them. And then you picture that same Bible being read to enslaved people in the US, to subjugated people in Africa, to people living under apartheid, and we're praying for him to deliver us, and he's not moving, he's not really getting involved, not really doing anything about it. And then you overcome that frustration and that rage, and you still become a Christian. Clearly, you have a massive ability to deal with contradictory ideals. So by the time I became feminist and Christian, it wasn't really a problem, because if I could become black and Christian, then the world is kind of your oyster, right? Like nothing really becomes difficult about that. And I tried to justify it to myself in a billion different ways. I was like, well, Jesus is not a misogynist, his followers are. Right? Jesus loves women, Jesus cares about women, Jesus accepts the money of women, Jesus accepts the donations of women. Women are included in the gospel narrative, women are included in the story of grace, in the lineage of grace. And it's not just the goody two-shoes women, the well-behaved women, it's the hoes and the hookers and the homewreckers, the ones that people say can't be turned into housewives. And those are the women that are in the lineage of grace. And so I'm thinking God has no problem with baddies, God has no problem with bad girls, God has no problem with women that have colorful histories. God has no problem with any of these things. So clearly his followers would be cool. So there shouldn't really be any contradiction between my being feminist and my being a believer. And then I'm getting dressed this evening and I know that I'm not going to church. I know that I'm coming here. And I'm genuinely contemplating if I'm allowed to wear a pair of pants. And I realized clearly the feminism has not feministed as hard as I thought it did. Because I'm also questioning whether or not I have the right to show up as myself, as a woman, in a space that is kind of religious but is not being held in the religious area. So clearly it doesn't work as cleanly as I thought it did. And then I thought, okay, no, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna look at the stories of women in the Bible who are radical, right? And the more I look at them, the more I find myself being pulled towards the women who are not necessarily religious. And I'm not entirely sure what that says about me. And when I look, one of my favorites is Jezebel. And my favorite is Jezebel because, contrary to popular opinion, Jezebel is an incredibly faithful and devoted wife. Jezebel never cheats on Ahab. There's no record of her cheating on him. Jezebel is incredibly submissive. When Ahab says he wants to steal somebody else's land, Jezebel says, relax, baby, I'm more than happy and willing to go and get it for you. And she does so. Jezebel does not allow her husband to be unhappy. She finds out that he's sleeping. He's not sleeping. He's not eating. He's so desperate for this piece of land and no one wants to give it to him. And this guy is refusing to sell. And Jezebel says, say less, love. I'll sort it out for you. And then I'm looking at, as Christian ladies who are debating whether or not the concept of submission is even a real thing. And here's this Jezebelite woman who doesn't really have an issue with it, right? And she's like, no, it's cool. I'm more than happy, willing and able to serve my man. Then I kept reading, I was like, okay, maybe Jezebel is not the best idea, so let me look for another character who also has the word J. And I bump into Jochebed, and I'm like, oh, Jochebed is really, really cool. She wants to save her child Moses from being killed by the Egyptians, and she does that by putting him in a basket in a river that is very famously full of crocodiles. And a friend of mine posted on his WhatsApp stories weeks ago, he says that Jochebed didn't have a plan. That child could have landed up in the Mediterranean. You just dump a kid. And you're not sure if there's hippos, you don't know if there's tigers or anything like that along the water. Well, there's no tigers in Egypt, but you get my drift. And she's very calm about this. And I thought, okay, maybe Jochebed is not the best example. Then I found Jael, another lady with a J. And Jael is at home one day when the general of an opposing army happens to walk into her tent. And when he walks into her tent, she decides, or he asks her for a glass of milk. And as he asks her for a glass of milk, she goes over and she gives it to him and he falls asleep. After he falls asleep, she takes a tent peg. I don't know if you guys ever go camping, but she takes a tent peg and she runs it through his head and it comes out the other side and he dies. So now I realize that I have a problem because I clearly enjoy murderous women. So that's not really the best example of good Christian femininity or feminism. If all my feminism ends in homicide. So, we might need to revisit that a little bit. But then I keep looking and I move back to like a more macro view of the text. And I see that the Bible is really, really cool in that it has a wide variety of women. It has hookers, it has sex workers, it has wives, it has childless people, it has barren women, it has women who have maybe too many kids. I think Leah had like 4 before she took the hint to stop having kids. It has young women, it has old women, it has prophetesses, it has professionals. Like the first kind of amazing women that we meet are in Exodus and they're Hebrew midwives, so they're medical professionals. You meet a whole bunch of them. And I thought, okay, that's cool because it means that in my womanness there isn't one black or white form or version of being a woman who is a believer and who is Christian. I can come as a Christian, I can come as a professional, I can come as a virgin, I can come as a bad girl. Somehow, somewhere, there's always space for me in the gospel narrative. I don't know how or when, but there seems to be some space for all of us at the foot of the cross. You find controversial women, you find quiet women, you find women who are, pretty difficult as well. The fun thing about it also is that you find women in their badness, right? The first person to bring sin into the world is a woman. The first rapist in the Bible is actually a woman. The night that, oh, y'all didn't know that? No? Okay, I'll give you a story. If you get someone so incredibly drunk that they don't know what is happening, can they consent to a sexual act? No, they can't. And in the book of Genesis, you have this man called Lot who leaves the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Sodom and Gomorrah came with him, and they get him super drunk. And after they get him super drunk, his one daughter sleeps with him, and then the following night they do it again, and the second daughter sleeps with him. And the Bible tells you that he does not know what is happening on either night. And so he is not able to concentrate, or not necessarily able to concentrate, not able to consent, not able to agree or to disagree to what is happening. And that quite literally is the legal definition of rape, where you perform sexual acts on somebody and they do not have the ability to say yes to them. And so we know that the first rapist in the Bible is actually female. The first recorded racist in the Bible is Miriam. Miriam says that she hates her brother's wife because she is a black woman. And so that should tell you something about black women and standing in solidarity with your own sisters, because you can't trust these other people, man. You really can't. And so that's the thing. And then the difficulty, or the next difficulty then comes in when you try to consider all of the different layers of yourself and whether or not those are welcome or present in the Bible. If you are queer, are you welcome? If you are queer and black, how do you deal with that? If you're queer, black, and female, how do you deal with that? If you're queer, black, female, and differently abled, queer, black, female, and of a different denomination, queer, black, female, and neurodivergent, queer, black, female with profound mental health issues, do you then have space? Do you then belong in the Bible as well? And so I look across that and I try to find examples. Unfortunately, do not find any examples of happily queer folk, although there is some debate about whether or not David and Jonathan were just friends. I'm not going to touch that one with a barge pole because I did not go to seminary and I am not trying to get kicked out of the church, which, problematic as it is, I do actually like. Then I tried and I thought, okay, cool, what about mental health issues? If you have mental health issues, is it cool to be a believer? And then you read the story of Elijah, who has a complete mental breakdown after a miraculous event, and he completely freaks out and he tells the Lord that he wants to die and that he is suicidal and that he doesn't see the point of living and that he feels super unsupported, super unloved, and that nobody has his back. And God responds to that really, really well. So clearly, mental health is cool. Then you have David, King David, who loses his son, and the Bible says that he is completely shattered, absolutely heartbroken, and he prays and he cries out to the Lord, and he cries about his son Absalom, Absalom, Absalom. And God also is very good and responds to that as well. You have Nebuchadnezzar, who, to be fair, God caused that mental health condition. He didn't just have it. You also have Saul, and God caused that mental health condition too. So maybe your depression is holy. Who knows? Maybe there's some, sacredness in schizophrenia. The gentleman in the front is so worried about what I'm saying. He's just looking at me like, girl, you're gonna get us not only kicked out of the restaurant, but kicked out of the church. Like, you can't just say, are you okay? Are you sure? Okay. Are you gonna have questions after this? No, no questions, you chill. Okay, that's good. All right. And so then I thought, okay, cool. Are there any other kind of examples of differently abled or disabled people in the Bible? And I thought, okay, maybe there's Mephibosheth. Then you go all the way, and I was like, okay, Mephibosheth seems like a pretty easy example. He's a baby, he's dropped while people are on the run, and he becomes paralyzed, I think, from the back down, he's paralyzed from the back down, and he's unable to walk, and that's how you kind of meet him. Then you go to Revelations, and you discover that not only is God really cool with disabled people, but he also has a really weird sense of humor, because he waits until John is blind, and then he gives him visions. And then you have this guy with no eyes who keeps saying, and I, John, saw. And you're like, what? You saw what? And again, I mean, if I'm able to accept that a man with physically no eyes was able to see the New Jerusalem coming down, arrayed as a bridegroom from her husband, then being a feminist is not that hard, is it? It shouldn't be impossible. And so now I sit here really, really comfortable in the fact that I believe that women, I have this radical, ridiculous idea that women are people. And at its core, that is what feminism is. The belief that women are human beings. The belief that women have the same intellect, the same ability, the same right to access and opportunities and abilities as men do. And not only that, that should they decide to pursue or not to pursue a certain course of action, that should be their decision. That should be their choice. And niggas looked at that and said, nah, dog, that doesn't make any sense to us. And yet when I look in the text, it does, right? In the beginning, God gives both male and female the ability to choose between right and wrong. And when they mess up, God doesn't go, oh, well, I can't hold her accountable. She's just a girl. He holds her fully accountable as an intelligent, as an accountable, as a person who is exercising complete and full agency to make decisions, whether they're wrong or right, whether they're good or bad. And so you see really early on from the creation narrative all the way until the end that God does not have any issues with women exercising choices, and that he has no options or problems with holding them accountable for those choices and those decisions. And several times over the text when women do disobey, they do get into trouble. The only time I don't really see them get into as much trouble as they could, for some strange reason, is for sexual sin. The men always seem to catch it harder than the women when it comes to sexual sin, right? Bathsheba loses a son for her participation, if you can call it that, in sexual sin, but David loses an entire kingdom. Delilah is not punished by God, but Samson does die in a temple full of Philistines. God doesn't punish any of the 1,000 women that Solomon married. Why anybody would marry 1,000? Anyways, it's fine. And I've seen a lot of people saying that, oh, I'd also love to marry that many women. But I've realized that God has levels to polygamy. And the levels of polygamy go along with your wallet and your intellect. And so you see, Adam doesn't have a job, doesn't have any money, has one wife until he dies. Then you have Abraham, who from all indications was at least $1 billionaire, at the very least. And he has one wife. The second wife they give him, he didn't even want. And then he marries another one after the first one dies. So then you know, okay, billionaire to Ugyale. And then you have Jacob, who is also, by all accounts, at the very least, $1 billionaire. And he has 4 wives. And so you see the level steadily increasing. Then you have David, who is a king. And he has, 4 or 5? 7, the number of completion. And then you have Solomon, who has 1,000. But, to be fair, Solomon was the wisest, smartest man who ever lived. So if his wife ever said to him, baby, do I look fat in this? Somehow Solomon had the perfect answer for that, right? If she walked up to him and she said, honey, if you had the opportunity to save the prettiest woman in the world and me, who would you save? Solomon would clearly say, it's easy, baby, I would save you because you're the prettiest woman in the world to me. Solomon is probably the only man who had the answer to the question, would you love me if I was a worm? So Solomon is qualified to marry 750 women. So we're talking about somebody who has multiple PhDs. We're talking about somebody who also has an insane net worth. I Googled him. I said, if we were to figure out what Solomon's net worth is, what would it be more or less? Still apparently not as rich as Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, who was so rich that he would destabilize the economies of each country that he passed through, because he would hand out so much gold, the value of the gold would drop. But Solomon, when I looked him up, was apparently worth $666 billion. I don't know what it says about him that the net worth is 666, but he was worth $666 billion. And he then qualified to have 1,000 wives. And so therefore we see, guys, that your paycheck and your intellect is closely tied to the number of women that you can have. If the only qualification that you have is matric, 1 girlfriend and below, please. If you have a bachelor's or an honors, we can consider you getting married. If you have a PhD, maybe a side chick is allowed, but we're not exactly sure. If you have 2 PhDs, definitely can have more than 1 wife. were happy with that. But God has made it very clear that women require a lot of money and a lot of intelligence. And I think that's a pretty feminist act, right? God does not want his daughters to be married to idiots or to broke niggas. And that is such a caring and a loving God. Isn't he just the best? Yeah, man, yeah, man. And I also love the fact that all the patriarchs were really, really hot, right? The Bible says that when Jochebed saw that Moses was a goodly, beautiful child, right? Come on, the deliverer, and he was fine. I'm down for that. And they said that David was also very beautiful, down for that. Solomon, beautiful, down for that. I'm not sure if Abraham was super good looking, but his sister, who was his wife, was very beautiful. So we can assume that maybe the genetics spread over the other way. Jacob also apparently very good looking, smooth skin. I don't think he had a connecting beard because they say that he didn't have any hair like his brother. Esau probably had the connecting beard, he didn't. But still very clear. A man of God must be wealthy, a man of God must be super intelligent. And you see that intelligence in the fact that he says that he would like to separate from his father Jacob, from his father-in-law Laban rather. And when he separates from his father-in-law Laban, he wants to take his sheep. And what he does by doing that, or how he manages to do that, is that he genetically manipulates or the breeding patterns of the sheep so that his animals have spots and stripes, and his father-in-law's animals only have, what is it called? Pale white skin. I think in modern terminology we would call that insider trading, because you quite literally manipulated the stocks. Ta-dam. Nobody got that? I'll save that as a big sister. My little brother's looking at me like, oh, that was terrible. And it's fine, because I'm a big sister. We get dad jokes. It's like dad jokes, but better. But it was literal stock manipulation. And we call that insider trading in 2025. And he figured out how to build his wealth from being able to manipulate his father-in-law's stock. And he so succeeded. And so, in conclusion, as I said, I'm also very tired. 35 years old is tough. You get to an age where you can't actually stay awake for a long period of time. And you need to sit down for everything, including very, very short conversations. But in conclusion, having looked at all of that, from Genesis to Revelation, having seen all the weird and wild and wonderful women at the test, having seen God's constant care and concern and intervention for women, having seen the incredibly high standards that God has for his daughters' husbands, and having seen how liberal and confident and calm he is with women who are radical. That, in conclusion, is why I consider myself a black, radical, intersectional feminist. Thank you.